The Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. Chapter 77. Storm Clouds. The Marauder's map made navigating the Slytherin dungeons fairly easy, although Theo took a ridiculous amount of time to leave his room and head off to dinner Tuesday evening. Hermione waited in an alcove behind the Merlin tapestry for him to pass, then tripped up to the snake charmer portrait.
"It is not titled that, honest man,"
the charmer said, setting down his flute. The cobra bobbed hello. "It is men who honors titles," Hermione answered. Niccolo Machiavelli had obviously been a Slytherin.
"Well spoken, little Hannibal,"
the charmer said as the portrait opened. Draco's door opened easily to her Alohomora, revealing the spotless, gracious room. A lace-covered table glittered with crystal and china and covered dishes. Hermione's lips tightened. It was outrageous, really. Draco's little lap of luxury here. The blue velvet curtains, embroidered with gold fleur-de-lis, were tightly closed. A silver tea tray graced the desk, its teapot embossed with the Malfoy crest and the words, Sanctimonia Vincent Semper. Purity will always conquer. There was no sign of the French prince in residence. Very well, she should wait. Hermione poured herself a cup of tea and stirred in 2 sugars. As she reached for the cup, her eye was caught by the 3 silver picture frames lined up in a fuzzy row. She picked up the first picture, Draco and Narcissa at platform 9 3/4. It was obviously first year, and Draco's little pointed face looked at her curiously, his hair slicked back. Narcissa's smile didn't reach her blue eyes. The second picture showed Draco and his friends cheering at a Quidditch match, all wrapped in green and silver scarves. Probably singing Weasley's Our King, she thought waspishly. Draco's arm was around Pansy, his face flushed. Hermione was startled to see Theo on Draco's other side, his face so bright and young, black hair flapping. She'd hardly noticed Theo back then. A movement in the corner of her eye drew her to the third frame, this one oval-shaped with entwined silver roses. The frame held a profit photo of Hermione herself, shot at Azkaban Pier of all places. Hermione held a half-dozen daisy bouquets here wild from the North Sea wind. He was smiling, for the first group of released Muggleborns was walking or limping off the Sharon. It had been the day after the Battle of Hogwarts, and the first time that Hermione had felt they had truly won, that the sacrifices had been worth it to see all those Muggleborns freed and back in the arms of family and friends. The photo didn't show any of that, only Hermione smiling again and again, clutching the daisies as long curls whipped into her eyes, and she shook it back impatiently. How long had that picture been on Draco's desk? Hermione didn't remember it from her first visit, but she had been distracted. The silver teapot suddenly flashed an eerie green in the darkening room. Other objects also previously glowed green. The china on the carpet, even a silver-backed hairbrush on the chest of drawers. Draco's silver-chased jade clock on the table's candlestick also glowed. Hermione looked around the room with a frown, but suddenly all was as before. She hastily set down the picture of Draco and Narcissa. Did the family objects not like her there, touching Draco's things? Sanctimonia Vincent Semper, after all. She huffed, not liking the thought, and moved away from the desk, bumping her hip on the dining table. The room was crowded, but Godric forbid that Draco go without his huge standing mirror or overstuffed armchair. The Sabology notebook lay open on the chair, and Hermione hesitated, then tossed her head. No bloody hairbrush was going to tell her what to do. So Hermione settled in the armchair, sipping tea and flipping through Draco's herbology notebook. His drawing of the devil's snare didn't include enough thoughts. Hermione shuddered and snapped the book shut. Where was Draco anyway? The lovely room now seemed close, almost oppressive. Sanctimonia Vincent Semper. Hermione suddenly felt like an interloper despite Draco's invitation. Narcissa's venomous words echoed. Your company has caused him to temporarily forget his duty to his family, his betrothed, and to himself. Hermione jumped to her feet and found herself at the closed curtain, her hand on its thick golden cord. The rich twisted rope was heavy in her fist. The room was closing in. She knew better than to listen to Narcissa, but could Draco truly shed the old ways? Could he make a real future with a Muggleborn? She viciously tugged on the rope, and the velvet curtains parted to reveal a roiling great lake. Stands of kelp whipped by strong currents. The storm that had threatened earlier in the day had arrived in full force, its power felt even under water. She could hear the muffled roaring and splashing of water. Chunks of driftwood spun past. Fish darted for shelter. Dark clouds billowed from the lake's muddy bottom. "Hermione," a quiet voice said. She jumped, startled, and turned around, dropping the golden rope. Draco stood there, his bag and black robe slung over one arm. His sharp features were etched with tiredness. He closed the bedroom door behind him. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said. It's fine," Hermione stuttered. A piece of driftwood slapped against the glass, and Draco's eyes flickered to the window, then back at her. "We don't have to eat if you don't want to," he said. "We can go to the Great Hall." Hermione swallowed. "No, I'd like to stay," she managed to say. "It's a beautiful table." The students' dinner was likely over anyway. Draco nodded and circled the table, carelessly tossing his robes and bag on the armchair and removing his tie. He made no move to kiss her, just pulled out one of the dining chairs, and Hermione took a seat, running her hands over her skirt. Draco sat opposite her and opened his napkin with a practical flick of his fingers. He played the perfect host, serving each of them and pouring glasses of pale elf-made wine, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. The dinner was quiet, oddly constrained. Hermione made an effort, catching Draco up with the squeaky mice's latest antics, and Hagrid's effort to import a dozen Stymphalian chicks, meat-eating birds, with bronze beaks and sharp metal feathers. Draco listened politely and offered up a few stories from his Muggle Studies class. But he was still distracted, not quite meeting Hermione's eyes, and constantly fiddling with something in his trouser pocket. He refilled their wine-glass, but neither drank very much. The room's golden lamps brightened as the light from the lake dimmed. Draco rose to shut the curtains again and add another log to the fire. It was a cozy scene, but the silences were growing longer. The jade clock ticked, the fire in the hearth snapped, and faint sounds of the storm could be heard behind the heavy curtains, an occasional roll of thunder muffled by the lake. The very air felt heavy with unsaid words. Finally, Draco put down his dessert fork and looked at her directly. "Hermione, what is it?" Draco's voice was soft. "Talk to me." Hermione looked down at the crystal glass in her hand. She didn't want to talk about it. She wanted to close her eyes and avoid the whole conversation, but that wouldn't be very Gryffindor. So she straightened in her chair and eyed him across the table. He looked so perfect, almost glowing in the lamplight. It was all perfect. Too perfect. For now. "Draco, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're safe," she said. "But I haven't forgotten. You broke your promise. You left me." Draco's shoulders sagged slightly. "I know, and I'm sorry," he said. "I thought it was best." "You do not get to decide what is best for us," Hermione interrupted, trying to keep her voice even. "If your feelings change, if you no longer care, that's one thing. But when you do care, when you love me and still leave me without any warning or discussion, you just leave me." Her hand began to shake, and she set down the glass. "I can't live like that." Draco blinked. "What are you saying?" "I love you, Draco," Hermione said. "There's no one else, but I couldn't bear it if you left again. If you decided I wasn't, I won't." His hand reached out to cover hers on the lacy tablecloth, stilling the shaking. "Everything's all right now. We can handle the talk. My mother will survive Azkaban until spring and will." Hermione pulled her hand away. No, you don't understand. You said it yourself. Lucius will never give up. What if he breaks out of Azkaban again and goes on a murderous rampage? I'd be his first target. What if the Ministry seizes all your properties and assets? What if the courts finds a loophole and put you back into prison? What if you're attacked by a werewolf or cursed by a Malfoy victim, or finally you taunt someone into a violent frenzy on the streets? Her eyes held his. Will you once again decide that you're too dangerous for me and leave? Draco sat frozen, staring at her in horror. I mean it, Draco. I won't live like that. Hermione repeated coldly, pushing her chair back and standing over him like an avenging angel. I will make the decision. I will walk out of. Draco stood as well, drawing himself up to his full height. Sounds from the storm outside intensified, piercing the heavy curtains, water splashing against the windows, faint thought of something striking the glass again. Hermione expected Draco to raise his voice, to shout at her that she was his, that he would never allow her to walk away. But he said nothing, his face expressionless. Nothing. But then, what could he say? Hermione didn't know what she needed to hear, but she needed something. She turned away, needing to look at something else, anything other than that Slytherin mask. Once again she pulled on the curtain, revealing the stormy deck, but the dark water reflected Draco clearly. He stood behind her, his hand slipping into his trousers pocket again. Would he draw his wand? Would he try to trap her here? But Draco just stood frozen for endless heartbeats. Then he removed his hand from his pocket and held up a small object. Hermione blinked. She knew the shape, the shine of onyx in the lamplight. She turned to face him again. Very well, Draco said, stepping closer. Here's what I will do. Now his grey eyes held hers. Hard and determined, his jaw was set. And Hermione couldn't look away. He swallowed and spoke in a clear voice. I swear on my ring and upon my very soul that despite any number of horrors and injustices that may rain down on myself and those I care for, I will not leave Hermione Granger unless my feelings have changed or at Hermione Granger's personal request. Aperta sum. The ring glowed green, then faded. He stared up at him, then down at the ring. What was that? Draco didn't answer, just slipped the ring on his finger. The ring seemed to shrink, resizing itself to fit a smaller hand. Draco sighed, tension draining from his body. Hermione gasped. You put on your ring? You changed your family motto? Yes, I did, Draco said calmly. You're right. I can't wait for the perfect time to wear this ring and claim my title. I'll claim it now, with both parents in Azkaban and my name a byword for evil. I will make the name something else. A faint smile. And I certainly couldn't keep the old motto. It didn't fit my plans at all. He held out his hand so she could see the ring more clearly, and Hermione stared down at the crest. The shield flanked by dragons and snakes. The central M and the two words shining brightly silver. Aperta sum, she said. I am open. I considered we Malfoys promised not to serve evil any more really this time, but that was too long, Draco said. I needed Bluebell to help me change it. His eyebrows drew down slightly. It took some time. The ring resisted forcefully. Hermione looked from his face to the ring, then back again, not knowing what to say. Draco raised his other hand, and she could feel trembling fingers on her cheek. He was touched by his oath to remain with her, but oaths could be fickle and meaningless, easily gotten around. More significant was the motto itself. I love you, Hermione, Draco whispered, stepping closer still. Tell me again that I haven't broken the object. Hermione looked up into those now pleading eyes. Her heart lurched in her chest, and she flung herself into his arms, gripping him tightly. Draco's arms wrapped around her. He's free, really free. He freed himself. "You haven't broken anything," she said into his jumper. "I love you and I'll stay for as long as you want me. I'm yours." They stood there for a timeless moment, clutching each other almost desperately. "You won't regret this," Draco said hoarsely. "I won't let you regret this. I know I'm a prick. I know I'm impossible, but I won't regret it," Hermione said, her face still buried in his chest. It was as Harry said, neither of them had a choice anymore. Draco tried to leave again, Hermione would chase him to the ends of the earth, and as for Draco, well, he'd warned her himself that he'd haunt her for the rest of her days. Enough for the ages we are. She felt his hands gently tilt her head back so he could kiss her, no hesitation this time. Dazed by the feel of him, she didn't resist as warm fingers moved to unbutton her torrid affair cardigan. He broke the kiss to look at him, but Draco's head was bent, his white blonde fringe hiding his eyes. "Too fast?" he asked in her ear. "There's no hurry. We can." Hermione shook her head. "Not fast enough," she said. There was a silence, with only the ticking clock to be heard. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Then Draco's mouth was on hers again, harsh, demanding, and the sound of ripping clothes rang out sharply. "So much for that skirt." Draco released her and yanked off both his jumper and shirt at once. The firelight and lamplight made his silvery Sectum Sempra scars glow. He moved to the bed, shedding the rest of his clothing, and gave her a significant look. She joined him, feeling the embroidered seed pass under her hands. "My beautiful girl," Draco whispered, pulling her atop on him. "Hermione." Hermione's hair fell rippling to his bare chest as she arched over him. Lightning flashed its silvery light, shining through the water and into the room through the open curtains. Draco's eyes shone. "Come to nurse me, Granger?" he asked with a trace of his old smile. "Yes." Hermione smoothed his hair back from his forehead, then bent to run her lips along that rough jawline. He smelled just the same, even better. The antiseptic odor of the infirmary replaced by some deliciously fragrant cedarwood soap. Merlin, she had missed him. She would never let him go again. Thunder rolled. Her hand trailed over his stomach and further down, and Draco's gasp made her body throb with need. Her mouth moved from jaw to chest, then lower, and he moaned softly. He stammered over her name as her lips closed over him, his hands in her hair now as he gave breathless instructions. "So bossy!" And it only aroused her more. "Stop, please," he finally begged, "or it will all end right here." Hermione released him and looked up at that almost broken face, his eyes glittering slits. He moved up his body again and kissed him now, and she felt his hands on her, pulling off the Slytherin lingerie, stroking and circling until she was the one moaning. She muttered a wondrous accio and felt the edged wood of her wand against her palm. Draco's eyes popped open at the sound of her murmured contraceptive spell. "Better safe than sorry." "Hermione," he began. Hermione slapped down the wand and pushed his hand away, then launched herself onto him with one sharp movement. Draco gasped as she rode him, his hands on her hips. I'm going to. Fuck!" He groaned and flipped her over in one smooth motion. "Let me," he gasped, "or it'll be over in seconds." Certainly nobody wanted that, so Hermione was fine with the change. She was more than fine. Courses of pleasure thrummed through her body, and Draco continued to thrust, his mouth on hers, his hand between them again, until she cried out, her voice mingling with another roll of muffled thunder. "Come for me now, Granger," he murmured, switching to her last name, and that did it. She called his name as the waves of her climax crested one after another, while she felt him come inside her again and again, until they finally collapsed, and then only sounds in the room were their panting breath and the waves outside. Then he was kissing her desperately, mumbling against her mouth, and Hermione could only catch the odd word. "Back, stay, mine." He repeated the last word again and again, and she could feel dampness on her cheeks. She was almost concerned. He sounded a bit hysterical, the emotions of the evening catching up with them both. But Draco calmed down after a while, rolling onto his back once more and drawing her with him. The room was quiet and dim now. The storm had subsided. Draco's face was shadowed, his dark profile sharp against the dying firelight. His breathing was softer now, and she lay with her head on his shoulder as he pulled the covers over them both. They were both exhausted, she knew, from weeks of tension and little sleep the night before. "I'm staying," she whispered, and felt his body relax further. "Sleep now." Draco mumbled something that she didn't quite catch, so she just made a vaguely reassuring sound in her throat. That seemed to do it. He sighed, and his breathing evened out, slow and deep. He snuggled into his warmth and fell asleep, surrounded by the smell of cedarwood and Draco. To be continued. Next up, Ernie's last event and our second to last chapter. Thank you for listening to the Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.